Hello guys, welcome back to another My Video Game Life. And today we're going to cover another game by Rare. I would like to call it a racing game, but it was so much more than that, and that is none other than Cobra Triangle. Now, at the time that Cobra Triangle originally came out, it came out in North America in July of 1989, and then was later released in Europe in January 1990. This to me was when Rare was really on a roll. Or at least this is when I first became aware of who Rare was. Because, again, before this game, they had released RC Pro-Am, and that was the first time I had ever heard of Rare, or knew who they were. And so they, like a lot of, back in the day, I was sending out letters, like I said, a bunch of video game companies, like any information about any game as possible, because they put all their addresses in the magazines. Like, for example, magazines actually would put, in the one part of the magazine, would actually put all the game companies and their actual addresses at this point, by this point, in a directory somewhere in their magazine. So if you wanted to send a letter to them for whatever reason, there was their address, you could send it out. And at that time, I was trying to memorize every developer who made a video game. Back then it was probably a little bit easier than today, considering there wasn't the split between the indie market and then so many different devices that games are played on today. But when I originally saw Nintendo Power Number 5, which came out originally in March/April of 1989, now a lot of people would know this cover from the ninja on the cover, because this was the original Ninja Gaiden game cover. And saw, about a 3-page spread on the game in there. I was excited for several reasons. Number one, because this game looked a lot like RC Pro-Am, and I liked the view and the style of RC Pro-Am. One of the things about the NES games back then, compared to like today, was a lot of the games all didn't look the same. And games always seemed to be taking leaps back then. In other words, the next one always seemed to outdo the other one. By the time you got another game, that other game seemed to have done leaps and bounds over the last game you had bought. So it looked a lot like RC Pro-Am, and it should, because it was actually running on the RC Pro-Am engine. Again, being a kid at the time, didn't know that. Actually, when this game came out, I was actually a teenager at this point. And then getting my Nintendo Power 6 in the mail in May or June of 1989, which would be the Teenage Ninja Turtle cover, and seeing another spread on this game, I really couldn't wait to rent this game and try it out. Now, again, when RC Pro-Am originally had come out, me and my best friend were into remote control cars, and we were playing basketball back then, just doing all kinds of stuff, being stuff kids did besides play video games, because you couldn't play video games all the time, or your parents wouldn't at least let us back then, even though we wanted to. At least until the summer, where somehow my mom had conned his father, since his father had to work all day during the summer, to allow me to actually babysit my best friend while he was gone during the summer. Then we played a lot of video games, but that's another story for another time. So, one of the things that I like about this game, when you talk about the vehicle controls, yes, it is a lot like RC Pro-Am, because you turn a lot like RC Pro-Am. The difference is, of course, RC Pro-Am, because it's a remote control car, the back end would of course slide. In this, because the back of the boat's actually, in a sense, more or less, it feels like it's the thing directing the boat. It doesn't have that slide around in the back end. It actually feels a lot like a boat. And one of the cool things was, when this game was first announced, me and my best friend would sit there, because we were connecting the dots between RC Pro-Am and Cobra Triangle. We're like, you know what? I wonder if this would be remote control boats. That would be so cool if these were remote control boats. Just like remote control cars, that would be so cool. But when we originally got the game, in our minds, we tried to make them remote control boats, though they weren't supposed to be. Now, this game, imagine this game is like this. Imagine if you took RC Pro-Am and Konami's Grady Shooter, and you put them together, except you make the main vehicle be a boat, and this is what you'd get. Because you have, of course, the controls of RC Pro-Am, except you have the power-ups of Gradius. So as a B is your gas, A shoots your gun, or shoots bullets, whatever, and then select would actually be the thing that selects your power-up. So just like, in the sense of Gradius, if you collected a little thing that had number 1 on it, you would move one slot over to that power-up you could possibly choose. If you got 2, you could do 2. A question mark would either be 1, 2, or a 1-up, and then there was a 1-up thing you could get on the board. If you collected any of those 4, that's what you'd get. Now, power-up wise in this game, again, it was a lot like a blueprint of Gradius. First slot was turbo. Second slot, you had other slots that had turbo. You had missiles. Was it force field? There were 5 power-ups in all. A lot of them were like Gradius power-ups. And of course, like once you select the turbo, then that thing was blanked out. You couldn't use it anymore. But other power-ups you could use more, power up more than once. Now, what made this game so unique for me? And again, the Miz is the one. When I did my last My Video Game Life with RC Prom, he pointed out, if you like this, you'd like Cobra Triangle, and that's what made me actually. I bought this game within the year, this last year, because I vividly remember the artwork of this game. I remember running it. I remember seeing it. I remember, it being important. But I remember it was a boat, but I couldn't remember what about it that was, I liked about it. And when I first brought it home, I just simply put it in the NES, turned it on, saw that it worked. Just moved a little bit ahead, said, okay, the game works. I want to play this another time. There are other games I wanted to play at the time. And so when that last video actually came out and he commented to it, I went, you know what, I'm going to spend several days with this game. And I did. And all the memories came flooded back to me of playing this game. Now, originally, I rented this game, again, in my hometown growing up. The video store was called The Video Store. And I remember going there and I remember seeing this on the shelf and renting it. And we took it home to play it. Now, what made this game so unique compared to any other racing game, shooting game at the time, was the levels were varied. It wasn't you were doing the same thing level to level. In a sense, there was almost, you did some stages you simply just raced your boat jumping ramps. Other stages you just had to race till the time ran out or against opponents. Other races or things you had to do was you had to basically make it through a track alive. Like, for example, you would have a track where there are logs. You'd be fighting to go upstream, and your logs would come down at you. You had to try to avoid them. You could shoot your gun, but your gun would just move one log up a little, like one space back. But if you didn't have turbo, you couldn't keep the logs back all the time. So I was just playing with a basic controller, no turbo. You couldn't keep the logs back, so it was kind of hard to avoid the logs. Even shooting it, you'd still hit it. You couldn't hit the sides, because if you hit the side, you would take damage. There were gun turrets that would shoot you from the side, so you could, take damage that way. But the same level with all this, you would also have whirlpools, that you had to avoid to try them. In another level where you had to basically, keep the people from getting abducted by boats. A UFO would come over and shoot you, and it would temporarily paralyze you for like a second. This game had so much variety in it. And then what would happen is when you got to the 5th stage, you would have a boss fight. And one of the things I loved the most about this game was when you look at the cover art and you see that serpent, right? A lot of regular video games, when you used to see that cover and that guy would be the main bad guy, right? The main boss. In those games, you'd have to get to the very end game to fight this guy. But in this game, he's the first boss. So you get to fight him right away. Now, this is not an easy game to play. It can be very difficult. Especially like fighting the serpent. Because if you touch him anywhere, you take damage. If you stay somewhere to actually shoot him, you can't stay there very long because he will shoot you. And because he can move around the screen, you have to move around too. And so it may be very difficult, unless you have turbo, which I didn't have turbo on, to beat him with one life. And there are other bosses as you go on. There's a crab, a squid. So there are other bosses you will fight as you go through the game. This game is varied, but it's also very difficult. That's what made it unique. It wasn't just a straight racing game, though I actually would have been happy with that kind of game at the time. But this game really blew me away with the variety, because I had no idea that there'd be so much variety when I played this game. Even though I've seen the magazine stuff, I thought, I just put in. Back then, when you put a game in, you didn't know what you were getting. It was like a grand adventure. You didn't know every little detail in the game. The magazines covered the most vague, basic things in the game. So when you put a game in, you didn't know exactly what you were getting. You didn't know exactly what you were going to see, or what you weren't, what you had a thought in your mind. This game's going to be this. But a lot of times, even though you used to think that, the game would have other things in it, right? That completely blow you away. You'd be like, I can't believe they did that in that game. That is so like cool. And a lot of times it'd be the littlest things. While this game is very difficult, it is very rewarding. I'm really glad, again, I got this back in my collection. I'm really glad I actually, like, after the time I played this game again. Now, you can't continue in this game. It's not like, oh, you 3 lives, you're dead. There are continues, so you can continue on and try to continue your way through the game. But this is still one of those games that was built in between, kind of like the arcade era with the home console hadn't been meshed right yet. So it was like, okay, we're going to build this like an arcade style game where you're going to die a lot, but if you get through it, it's going to be very rewarding. So again, I love the isomorphic visuals of this game. This is one of those games when I later bought it, when I had my original NES, that, even though it was very difficult, like, man, sometimes this game can be incredibly frustrating. When I'm sitting around going, you know what, I don't, not night to rent today, I'm not sure what I want to play, I'll put that game in and play it. So, thanks for watching this episode of My Video Game Life, guys.